In a chic cafe buzzing with laughter, a young black waitress overhears a group of privileged white women mocking her. Cruel jokes disguised as harmless fun. But when she quietly turns the tables with a single poised question, it shatters their arrogance and forces them to confront the ugly truth behind their words. What follows is a ripple effect of guilt, reflection, and unexpected transformation, proving that even the smallest stand against prejudice can change everything. Before we begin this gripping story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. The cafe was bustling with energy as the early afternoon crowd filled the room. Sunlight poured through the large windows, casting soft light on the tables and chairs. This was one of those popular spots in the city, busy, full of chatter, and frequented by the well-dressed and well-off. The air was thick with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and baked pastries. Outside, the street echoed with the sounds of life, honking cars, people in conversation, and footsteps shuffling along the sidewalks. At a table near the window, 4 women sat in a tight cluster. They were clearly enjoying each other's company, laughing loudly and tossing back their blonde, styled hair. Their outfits spoke of high fashion, polished blouses, designer bags slung over the backs of their chairs, sleek manicures visible as they gestured animatedly. Their conversation, while mundane, was filled with a sense of self-assuredness that demanded attention. They were clearly regulars here, comfortable and in control of their surroundings. Amara, the young waitress, had just started her shift. She moved from table to table with precision, balancing trays of food and drinks with ease. Her dark skin glowed under the cafe's soft lighting, and her natural curls were tucked neatly into a bun. Her uniform, a simple black apron over her white blouse and black slacks, made her blend in with the other staff. But there was something about her posture, the way she carried herself, that made her stand out. She noticed the group of women as she approached their table with a soft smile. "Good afternoon, ladies. May I take your order?" Her voice was gentle, yet firm. The women paused their conversation just long enough to glance at her. They exchanged looks with each other, a flicker of amusement passing between them. "We'll have the iced vanilla lattes," one of them, Vanessa, said, barely glancing at Amara as she spoke. Amara nodded, writing down the order, not paying attention to the subtle shift in their expressions. As she turned to walk away, a soft murmur reached her ears, and it wasn't hard to discern what was being said behind her back. "Did you see the way she looked at us? Like she's trying too hard," one of the women, Rachel, whispered, her voice just loud enough for Amara to hear. "Yeah, I don't get why she has her hair like that. It's just too much," another added, her words dripping with condescension. Amara didn't falter in her steps, but the sting of the words hit her. It wasn't the first time she had experienced this type of commentary, especially in places like this cafe, where the clientele often came with a side of entitlement. But it never became easier to ignore. With years of experience behind her, she had learned to let the comments slide, to continue working with a professional smile on her face. But today felt different. There was a heaviness in her chest that made her pause for just a second before continuing to the barista counter. As Amara prepared the women's order, she couldn't help but reflect on the scene that had just unfolded. It wasn't just the comments. It was the way they had been made. Like she wasn't even a person. Like she was invisible. She exhaled slowly and forced herself to focus on the task at hand. There were other customers to serve, other orders to fill. She wouldn't let them get under her skin. By the time she returned to the table with the drinks, the women were deep in conversation again. They hardly acknowledged her as she set down their lattes, save for one, the one with the sharp eyes and smug smile. Caroline, the ringleader of the group, made a snide comment just as Amara was about to walk away. "Thanks, sweetheart," she said, her voice dripping with mock kindness. "Do you always dress like this? You know, you could try a little harder with your appearance." Her friends giggled. Amara's hand tightened slightly on the tray she was holding, but she remained composed. She'd been here before, countless times. Her training, her professionalism, these were the shields she used to protect herself from their words. Is there anything else I can get for you? She asked calmly, meeting Caroline's eyes. Caroline smirked, glancing at her friends for approval before replying, No, we're fine. For now. Amara nodded and turned away, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the faint murmurs of their continued conversation, punctuated by bursts of laughter. This was their game, and she was their target. In the kitchen, Amara leaned against the counter for a moment, letting the cold surface soothe her. Her colleague, Jenny, a fellow waitress, noticed her pause. You okay? Jenny asked, her brow furrowing in concern. Amara forced a smile. Yeah, just a rough table. Jenny didn't need to ask which one. She glanced out through the window at the group of women and rolled her eyes. They come in here all the time. You know the type. Think they own the place. Amara nodded, though the knot in her chest didn't loosen. Yeah, I know. It's just exhausting. Jenny placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Don't let them get to you. They're just bored and insecure. You're better than that. Amara appreciated Jenny's words, but they didn't quite soothe the ache building inside her. She took a deep breath, pushed off from the counter, and straightened her apron. She couldn't afford to lose her composure. Not here, not now. With renewed determination, she stepped back into the cafe. As she approached the table again, the tension was palpable. The women had grown louder, more brazen in their remarks. It was clear that they were enjoying their game, taking turns making thinly veiled insults and laughing at Amara's expense. Caroline, emboldened by her friend's approval, took it a step further. You know, she said, her voice dripping with false sincerity, I think you'd look much better if you smiled more. It might help you get better tips. The laughter that followed was sharp and cruel. Amara stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of their words settle in her chest. She could feel the anger bubbling up inside her, but she held it back. She had been raised to rise above situations like this, to maintain her dignity in the face of disrespect. But today, something inside her snapped. She placed the tray down on their table with deliberate care, her movements slow and controlled. The women quieted, sensing the shift in her demeanor. Is there anything else I can do to make you feel more comfortable? Amara asked, her voice steady but firm. She met Caroline's eyes with a calm intensity that caught the woman off guard. For a moment, there was silence. The women exchanged uneasy glances, their previous confidence faltering. Caroline's smirk faded, replaced by a look of discomfort. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Amara's calm gaze lingered on Caroline, waiting for a response. The silence at the table grew thick as the other women shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The once boisterous energy was gone, replaced by an awkward tension. Caroline fidgeted with the handle of her latte cup, her fingers tapping against the porcelain as she struggled to regain her footing. No, we're fine, she muttered, avoiding eye contact. The arrogance that had filled her voice moments earlier was now gone, replaced by a flicker of embarrassment. Amara nodded once, her face expressionless. Very well, she said, her voice steady, giving nothing away. Turning on her heel, she walked away, leaving the group in their discomfort. Her heart was still pounding, but it was different now. It wasn't the result of humiliation or anger. It was from the quiet satisfaction of standing her ground, of not allowing their cruelty to define her. As she returned to her duties, the cafe seemed to take on a different energy. The sounds of clinking dishes and murmured conversations continued as usual. But Amara felt lighter, more in control. She knew this moment wouldn't erase the years of casual racism and condescension she had endured in her life. But it was a small victory, and today that was enough. At their table, the group of women sat in a heavy silence. The laughter that had once filled the space between them had vanished, replaced by a sense of unease that none of them were quite willing to acknowledge. Vanessa cleared her throat, breaking the silence. Well, that was awkward, she said, trying to laugh it off, but her voice lacked the usual confidence. Rachel, who had been one of the quieter ones, shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we shouldn't have, gone that far," she said, her voice barely audible over the background noise of the cafe. Caroline, still embarrassed, was quick to defend herself. "Oh, come on, it was just a joke. She knows we didn't mean anything by it." But even as she spoke, the words felt hollow. Deep down, Caroline knew that what she had said hadn't been a joke, and the others knew it too. The truth hung between them like a shadow they couldn't shake. One of the women, Megan, who had been mostly silent throughout the ordeal, finally spoke up. "I don't know, Caroline. Maybe we should have been nicer." Caroline's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. The mood at the table had shifted, and she wasn't sure how to bring it back. The group sat in silence for a moment longer before Caroline abruptly stood up, grabbing her purse. "Let's just go," she muttered, throwing some cash onto the table without looking at the others. The women followed her lead, silently gathering their things. As they stood, Megan hesitated, glancing at Amara across the cafe. Something tugged at her conscience, an uncomfortable sense that she should say something, do something to make it right. But the moment passed, and Megan followed her friends out the door, leaving behind the small pile of crumpled bills on the table. As the cafe door closed behind them, Amara watched from across the room. She didn't expect an apology, and she hadn't received one, but she felt a sense of closure as the women left. She didn't need their validation or their remorse. What she had gained today was something far more important, her own sense of self-worth. For the rest of her shift, Amara carried on with her work, tending to customers with the same professionalism she had always shown. But internally, she was different. Something had changed, a small shift in how she saw herself and how she navigated the world. She no longer felt like the passive recipient of other people's cruelty. Today, she had taken control. At the end of the day, as she removed her apron and prepared to leave, Amara felt the weight of the day lift from her shoulders. She grabbed her jacket from the back room and stepped out into the cool evening air. The city streets buzzed with life, the hum of traffic and distant conversations filling the night. She walked with her head held high, her steps steady and purposeful. Tomorrow would be another day, and there would undoubtedly be more challenges ahead. But Amara knew now that she could face them with grace. Meanwhile, outside the cafe, the group of women walked in strained silence. The usual chatter that filled their conversations was absent, replaced by the awkward tension that had settled between them. Vanessa tried to break the silence with a casual comment about their weekend plans, but it fell flat. As they reached the corner, Megan slowed her pace, letting the others walk ahead. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The words they had thrown at Amara in the cafe now echoed in her mind, and they felt uglier with each passing moment. She wasn't like Caroline or Rachel. She didn't enjoy putting people down. But today, she had laughed along with the others, too afraid to stand up and say something. The guilt gnawed at her, a constant reminder that she had been a part of something wrong. As the others continued down the street, Megan stopped, her feet rooted to the sidewalk. She watched them walk away, their voices fading into the distance. For the first time that day, she felt the weight of her own silence, the burden of complicity. With a sigh, Megan turned and walked back toward the cafe. She wasn't sure what she would say or do when she got there, but she knew she had to make things right. Maybe it wouldn't change what had happened, but it was a start. Amara had just locked the cafe's back door when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see Megan approaching, her face flushed with guilt and hesitation. "Hey," Megan said softly, her voice wavering. I wanted to apologize. For earlier. We were way out of line, and I should have said something." Amara looked at her for a moment, taking in the sincerity in her eyes. She wasn't used to people coming back to apologize. Usually they just moved on, forgetting the hurt they had caused. "Thank you," Amara said, her voice steady. "I appreciate that." Megan shifted awkwardly, unsure of what else to say. I don't want you to think that's who I am. I don't want to be like that. Amara nodded, understanding. We all make choices, she said, her tone gentle but firm. It's how we learn from them that matters. Megan smiled faintly, grateful for Amara's kindness. I'll do better, she promised. Amara offered a small smile in return, watching as Megan turned and walked away, the weight of the day finally lifting from both their shoulders. As she stood there, alone in the cool night air, Amara felt a sense of peace settle over her. It wasn't about forgiveness or absolution. It was about understanding that people could change, that there was always hope for something better. She had faced the cruelty of others today, but she had also seen the possibility of redemption, and for that, she was grateful. The next morning, the cafe was quieter than usual. The hum of regular customers filled the space, and Amara was back in her usual routine, moving from table to table with her steady composure. Despite what had happened the previous day, she was focused on her job, determined not to let the ugliness of the past cloud her new day. But something had changed. At the same table by the window where Caroline, Vanessa, Rachel, and Megan had sat the day before, a different group of customers had taken their place. It was a pair of older women, quietly sipping their coffee and chatting about their weekend plans. Amara approached their table with her usual professionalism, taking their order with a smile. Yet, as she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was an undercurrent of tension that lingered from the previous day. It was subtle, like a shadow that hung over her interactions with certain customers, but it was there. People were watching her more closely, as if they had heard whispers of what had transpired. She tried to push it out of her mind, focusing on the orders, on the routine, but the memory of Caroline's mocking smile and the others' laughter still haunted her thoughts. The sharpness of their words, the cruelty disguised as humor, it gnawed at her, even though she had stood her ground. Caroline's day was not going as she had planned. After leaving the cafe the day before, she had been preoccupied with trying to shake the feeling of discomfort that had settled over her. She had told herself that it was nothing, that Amara was just overreacting, that it wasn't her fault. But deep down, she knew better. As she sat in her office, staring at her computer screen, Caroline's mind kept drifting back to the look in Amara's eyes when she had asked that pointed question. Is there anything else I can do to make you feel more comfortable? The memory of that moment had been haunting her. She had expected Amara to shrink away, to stay quiet, and let the insults roll off her back like so many others had. But instead, Amara had stood firm, forcing Caroline to confront her own ugliness. Caroline felt the sting of shame creep into her chest. She hadn't thought much of it at the time. After all, it had just been a joke, right? But now, in the quiet of her office, she couldn't deny the truth. She had crossed a line. She leaned back in her chair and sighed, running a hand through her perfectly styled hair. Maybe it was time to reevaluate some things. That evening, Caroline sat in her apartment, staring at her phone. Her friends had invited her out for drinks, but she had declined, saying she wasn't feeling well. In reality, she just didn't want to face them. The group dynamic had shifted, and Caroline knew that they all felt the same discomfort she did. Her finger hovered over Megan's name in her contact list. She had noticed the way Megan had hesitated yesterday, the way her expression had softened as Amara spoke. Unlike the others, Megan had seemed genuinely affected by what had happened, and Caroline couldn't help but wonder if Megan was feeling the same guilt she was. Taking a deep breath, Caroline tapped on Megan's name and sent a text. Hey, can we talk about what happened yesterday? I've been thinking a lot, and I feel like I owe you an apology too. The message sent, and Caroline set her phone down, feeling a strange mixture of anxiety and relief. She had taken the first step, and that was something. Now, all she could do was wait. Megan had been feeling the weight of the previous day's events all afternoon. After her conversation with Amara, she couldn't stop replaying the scene in her head. The comments, the laughter, the way they had all participated in the cruelty without thinking twice. It had been so easy, almost automatic. When Caroline's text came through, Megan's heart skipped a beat. She had been avoiding the group chat, not wanting to rehash what had happened. But this message felt different. It felt sincere. She responded quickly. I've been thinking about it too. I'm really ashamed of how we acted. I talked to Amara afterward. I think we need to do more than just feel bad about it. The conversation continued back and forth, each message bringing them closer to a shared understanding of what needed to happen next. Caroline admitted that she had been wrong, and Megan expressed her regret for not standing up to her friends sooner. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Together, they decided that they needed to apologize to Amara, not just as individuals, but as a group. It wasn't enough to say sorry and move on. They needed to acknowledge the harm they had caused and take responsibility for it. The next day, Amara was nearing the end of her shift when she noticed Caroline, Megan, and the others entering the cafe. For a moment, her heart sank. She braced herself for another round of rude comments or condescending remarks, but something was different this time. The group was quieter, their demeanor more subdued. Megan was the first to approach her, followed closely by Caroline and the others. There was an awkward silence as they stood in front of her, clearly unsure of how to begin. Amara, Megan started, her voice soft but firm. We owe you an apology. We acted horribly yesterday, and there's no excuse for the way we treated you. Caroline stepped forward, her usual confidence replaced by a more vulnerable expression. I'm really sorry, she said, her voice quiet. I said some terrible things, and I regret it. I shouldn't have treated you that way. Amara looked at the group, taking in their expressions. She could see the sincerity in their eyes, the guilt that weighed on them. But she wasn't sure how to respond. She had never expected an apology, especially not from people like them. After a long pause, Amara nodded. Thank you for apologizing, she said. But you need to understand that words like that, they hurt. And it's not just about me. It's about the way people like me are treated every day. Caroline and Megan exchanged a glance, their expressions somber. We know, Megan said, and we're going to do better. We promise. Amara could see the weight of their guilt, but she wasn't interested in making them feel better about themselves. She wanted them to understand the impact of their actions, to take responsibility for the way they had contributed to a much larger problem. I hope you do, she said finally, because it's not just about feeling bad. It's about changing how you treat people. The group nodded in agreement, their expressions thoughtful. After a few moments of silence, they thanked her again and left the cafe, their footsteps quieter than before. As the group left the cafe, Amara felt a strange sense of closure. It wasn't forgiveness. She wasn't ready to offer that just yet, but it was a step forward. She had stood her ground, spoken her truth, and made them face the reality of their actions, and in doing so, she had reclaimed a piece of her dignity. The rest of her shift passed quietly, the usual rhythm of the cafe taking over once again. But this time, Amara felt lighter. She had been through a storm, but she had come out the other side stronger, more sure of herself than ever before. As she closed up the cafe that night, locking the doors and turning off the lights, she stepped out into the cool night air with a sense of peace. The world wasn't perfect, and there would always be challenges ahead, but she knew now that she could face them. Amara walked down the street, her footsteps steady and purposeful. The city stretched out before her, full of life and possibility. And in that moment, she knew that she had the strength to navigate whatever came her way. For Caroline, Megan, and the others, the apology had been just the beginning of their journey. They had left the cafe that day with a new understanding of the harm they had caused, but they knew that real change wouldn't happen overnight. It would take time, effort, and a commitment to doing better. Caroline, in particular, found herself reflecting on her behavior more than she ever had before. She had always been confident, sometimes to the point of arrogance, but now she realized that her confidence had often masked a deeper insecurity. She had used her words to tear others down because it made her feel more in control, more powerful. But now, she understood that true strength came from kindness, from lifting others up instead of pushing them down. Days had passed since the encounter at the cafe, and Caroline found herself confronting an uncomfortable truth. It wasn't easy. She had always believed that she was above prejudice, that the way she spoke to people was merely her sense of humor, edgy but harmless. But the look in Amara's eyes, the firmness in her voice, it had pierced through Caroline's self-assured facade and left her questioning everything. She began to see her past actions in a different light. It was as though her own words, her sarcastic remarks and jokes, were now mirrors reflecting an ugliness she had never been willing to acknowledge. She replayed conversations with friends, moments when she had laughed at someone's expense, when she had used people's differences, racial, economic, cultural, as fodder for humor. It had always seemed innocent at the time, but now it felt cruel. Megan, on the other hand, had taken a different approach to processing the situation. She had always prided herself on being kind and open-minded, yet she had failed to speak up when it mattered most. That silence weighed on her more heavily than the words she had laughed along with. She had been a part of the problem, and now she knew that staying silent in moments of injustice was just as harmful as participating in it directly. In the days that followed, Megan began to seek out conversations about race and privilege with her colleagues and family members. These weren't easy talks to have, and she quickly realized that many people like her, had never truly considered their own biases. It wasn't just about racism. It was about the everyday microaggressions and casual assumptions that people of color had to endure. She had to look inward, acknowledge her privilege, and use it to advocate for something better. Amara, meanwhile, was continuing with her life as usual, or at least trying to. The cafe had returned to its regular rhythm, and while there were no more incidents like the one with Caroline and her friends, the lingering impact of that day stayed with her. She had been proud of herself for standing her ground, for asserting her dignity in the face of those cruel remarks, but there was still a heaviness in her chest. It wasn't just about the incident. It was about all the times before it. The countless times she had been the subject of similar comments and had chosen to let it slide for the sake of keeping peace. It was about the times people had looked at her like she didn't belong in certain spaces, even though she had every right to be there. One evening, after a long shift, Amara sat in her small apartment, the noise of the city filtering through her window. She thought about her mother's advice, the words she had heard growing up. You've got to be twice as strong, twice as patient, because this world isn't fair. Her mother had endured far worse, growing up in an era where racism was more overt, more dangerous. And yet, here Amara was, decades later, still facing the same kind of subtle, insidious prejudice. But something had shifted in her. She realized that she wasn't as powerless as she had once believed. She had stood up to Caroline, made her feel the weight of her own words. And even though it hadn't erased the pain, it had given Amara a sense of control over her own narrative. She wasn't just a passive recipient of other people's cruelty. She had a voice, and she had used it. Megan continued to grapple with her feelings of guilt, but she wasn't content to leave it at that. She began volunteering at a local organization that worked on racial justice issues, hoping to learn more and become part of the solution. It wasn't enough to just feel bad. She wanted to take action. She attended workshops, read books, and began to actively seek out voices from communities she had never truly listened to before. One afternoon, Megan found herself at a community event, standing among a diverse group of people sharing their stories of discrimination and resilience. As she listened to a young black woman talk about her experiences with racism in the workplace, Megan was struck by the similarities between this woman's story and what had happened to Amara. The casual comments, the jokes, the feeling of being singled out. It all echoed what she had witnessed at the cafe. Megan approached the woman after the event and introduced herself. They talked for a while, and Megan confessed the guilt she had been carrying since that day at the cafe. The woman listened patiently, and when Megan had finished, she gave her a small, understanding smile. It's not about being perfect, the woman said gently. It's about being willing to learn and do better. That's what matters. Megan left the event feeling a sense of purpose she hadn't felt before. She wasn't looking for absolution. This wasn't about her. but she was determined to continue her journey toward being a better ally, a better friend, and a better person. For Caroline, the path forward wasn't as clear. She struggled with how to navigate her feelings of guilt and embarrassment. She hadn't gone out with her friends since the day at the cafe, finding excuses to avoid their usual get-togethers. In truth, she didn't know how to face them, or even herself. One evening, as she sat at home, staring at the wine glass in her hand, she opened her laptop and began researching. She had never really understood what people meant when they talked about privilege. It had always seemed like something distant, abstract, unrelated to her life. But as she read articles, watched videos, and listened to Black voices speak about their experiences, Caroline began to realize how little she had truly known. The hardest part for Caroline was admitting that she had been wrong. Wrong about a lot of things. She had always seen herself as progressive, as someone who believed in equality. But that belief had never translated into her actions, and now she had to come to terms with the fact that she had been part of the problem. One morning, Caroline decided to reach out to Megan. They hadn't spoken much since that day, but she knew that if anyone could understand what she was going through, it would be Megan. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Caroline texted. "I don't know how to make this right, but I want to try. Can we talk?" Megan responded quickly, and the two of them met for coffee the next day. As they sat across from each other, sipping their drinks, Caroline felt the weight of the past few weeks lifting ever so slightly. They talked openly about what had happened, about their roles in it, and about how they could move forward, not just as individuals, but as part of a larger community that needed to change. By the end of the conversation, Caroline knew that this was only the beginning. There was a long road ahead, but for the first time, she felt like she was on the right path. Back at the cafe, life continued as usual. Amara had grown used to the ebb and flow of customers, the daily interactions that made up her routine. But something had shifted since the day Caroline and her friends had returned to apologize. It wasn't just in the way they had treated her. It was in the way she saw herself. Amara knew that there would always be people like Caroline, people who saw her as less than, who made cruel remarks without thinking about the impact. But she also knew that she had the strength to stand up to them. She didn't need their approval, and she didn't need their pity. She had her own sense of worth, and that was something they could never take from her. As she finished her shift one evening, Amara stepped out into the twilight, the city lights twinkling above her. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool breeze on her skin, and smiled. She had faced down prejudice and come out the other side stronger, and that, more than anything, was her quiet victory. Several weeks had passed since that fateful day at the cafe, and life was slowly starting to settle back into its usual rhythm for all involved. However, the ripples of that encounter had continued to spread, creating lasting changes in the lives of those affected. Megan, in particular, found herself gravitating toward new experiences and new perspectives. She'd thrown herself into the work she was doing with the local racial justice organization, attending workshops, discussions, and reading materials she had never thought to engage with before. But as much as she was learning, there was still a weight she carried, the feeling that she hadn't fully made amends with Amara. One afternoon, after finishing up a volunteer shift, Megan found herself walking toward the cafe. She hadn't seen Amara since that day, not face to face, and there was something pulling her toward closure, something more than the simple apology they had offered before. She felt the need to check in, to offer more than just words, to express a genuine sense of change. The familiar bell over the cafe door jingled as Megan stepped inside. The same warm scent of coffee and baked goods greeted her, but this time, the atmosphere felt different. It felt calmer. Megan scanned the room and spotted Amara behind the counter, busy pouring a cup of coffee for a customer. For a moment, Megan hesitated. What would she say? How would she start this conversation? But then she remembered the weight of silence, the guilt she had carried for being complicit. This was her chance to do something better. Megan approached the counter, and when Amara glanced up, their eyes met. There was a brief flicker of recognition, followed by a quiet understanding. Hi, Amara, Megan said softly. I know we've already apologized, but I just wanted to see how you're doing. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, and I've been trying to make some changes in my own life. Amara paused for a moment, taking in Megan's words. She hadn't expected any of them to come back again, let alone check in on her personally. She studied Megan's face and saw the sincerity there. This wasn't just a quick fix. Megan was truly making an effort to understand, to grow. I'm doing okay, Amara said after a beat. I appreciate you coming by. It means a lot. Megan exhaled, relieved that the conversation wasn't as awkward as she had feared. I'm really trying, she continued. I've learned a lot since that day, but I know I still have a long way to go. I just wanted you to know that. Amara nodded, offering a small smile. That's all anyone can do. Try. They talked for a few more minutes, the conversation flowing more naturally now. It wasn't about rehashing the past, but about acknowledging the journey both women were on. Amara, continuing to navigate the world as a black woman in spaces where she wasn't always respected, and Megan, learning how to be a better ally, one small step at a time. As Megan left the cafe that afternoon, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. She knew that this wasn't the end of her journey. It was just the beginning. But for the first time, she felt like she was truly on the right path. While Megan had found solace in her efforts to make things right, Caroline's journey toward self-awareness had been more turbulent. She had always been the type of person who refused to admit when she was wrong. Even after her apology to Amara, Caroline had struggled to fully confront her own role in perpetuating the casual racism that had unfolded that day. For a while, she tried to distract herself, throwing herself into work and social events, pretending that everything was fine. But the guilt lingered. Every time she laughed at a joke that crossed the line, every time she brushed off someone else's discomfort, she felt a gnawing sensation in her gut, a reminder that she was still part of the problem. It wasn't until she was out with some friends one night, sitting in a crowded bar, that the full weight of her behavior hit her. One of her friends, a man named Jared, made a comment about a server's accent, mocking the way she spoke. It was meant to be funny, harmless even. But in that moment, Caroline saw the joke for what it really was. Cruelty dressed up as humor, just like the comments she had made toward Amara that day. For the first time, Caroline didn't laugh. She felt her stomach twist as she remembered the look on Amara's face, the quiet strength she had shown in the face of their mocking. Caroline looked around at her friends, watching as they chuckled and nudged each other, completely oblivious to the harm they were causing. She had been just like them once, unaware, uncaring, indifferent. But now, she couldn't ignore it. Without thinking, Caroline stood up. "That's not funny," she said, her voice louder than she intended. The table went quiet, and all eyes turned toward her. Jared raised an eyebrow. "Come on, it's just a joke. Don't be so sensitive." Caroline's heart pounded in her chest. This was her moment. A chance to either shrink back into the person she had been or step forward into the person she wanted to become. She thought of Amara, of the way she had handled their cruelty with grace, and took a deep breath. "No, it's not just a joke," Caroline said firmly. "It's disrespectful, and we shouldn't be treating people like that." The silence at the table stretched on for what felt like forever. Caroline could feel the weight of her friends' stares, the disbelief that she, of all people, was the one calling them out. Jared shrugged, clearly irritated. "Whatever, you're being dramatic." But Caroline didn't back down. "No, I'm not. And if you can't see that, then maybe we need to rethink what we consider funny." With that, she grabbed her bag and walked out of the bar, her heart still racing. She didn't know what the fallout would be, if her friends would stop inviting her out, if they would start seeing her as too sensitive. But in that moment, none of it mattered. She had finally taken a stand, and that was worth more than fitting in. As she walked home that night, Caroline felt lighter than she had in weeks. She still had a long way to go, but for the first time, she felt like she was moving in the right direction. Amara, on the other hand, had also found herself reflecting on the power of change. After her conversation with Megan, she realized how rare it was for people to truly confront their biases and make amends. Most of the time, people moved on from their mistakes without ever looking back, leaving behind a trail of hurt they never bothered to fix. But Megan had been different. She had come back, not to clear her conscience, but to listen, to learn, and to grow. It was a rare kind of sincerity, and Amara couldn't help but respect that. It reminded her that change was possible, even in the most unlikely of people. As the days went by, Amara found herself feeling more at peace with the incident. It wasn't about forgiving or forgetting, but about recognizing that she had the power to influence others, even in small ways. Her decision to stand up to Caroline and her friends had created a ripple effect, one that had led Megan to seek out growth and had even caused Caroline to reconsider her actions. It was a reminder that even the smallest acts of defiance could spark something greater. Change didn't happen overnight, and it didn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it was as simple as asking a question, "Is there anything else I can do to make you feel more comfortable?" That one moment had set off a chain of events, and now Amara could see the impact. She had chosen to stand tall, and in doing so, she had forced others to confront their own behavior. As she walked home after another long shift, Amara felt a sense of quiet pride. She hadn't just endured the cruelty of others, she had risen above it. And in the process, she had helped others rise too. Months later, the incident at the cafe had become a distant memory for most people, but not for those involved. Caroline, Megan, and Amara had all walked away from that day with new perspectives, new challenges, and new opportunities for growth. Caroline had slowly begun to distance herself from the friends who refused to see the harm in their words and actions. It hadn't been easy, but she knew it was necessary. She had started surrounding herself with people who shared her desire to be better, to create a more respectful and understanding world. Megan had continued her work with the racial justice organization, becoming more involved in their initiatives and using her platform to raise awareness about the subtle ways racism could manifest in everyday life. She wasn't perfect, and she knew she still had a lot to learn, but she was committed to the journey. And as for Amara, she had grown stronger, more confident in her ability to navigate the world around her. She no longer let the small slights and casual insults weigh her down as they once had. She had reclaimed her power, and she was determined to keep it. The world wasn't perfect, and there was still a long way to go. But for the first time in a long time, they each felt hopeful that change was possible, that growth was attainable, and that together, they could make a difference. In the end, the story wasn't just about a group of women at a cafe. It was about something bigger, about the quiet strength it takes to stand up to injustice, about the power of self-reflection, and about the ripple effect that one small act of defiance can create. Each of them, Caroline, Megan, and Amara, had learned something valuable from that day. They had learned that justice isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's found in the small moments, in the questions asked and the silences broken. And sometimes that's enough to change everything.